It's my privilege tonight to introduce our speaker, who didn't have to travel too far. She just hitchhiked down Broad Street. Founded in 1991 by the great graduate from West Catholic High School, Cardinal John O'Connor, a tremendous friend to the pro-life movement, the Sisters of Life are consecrated to enhance the sacredness of human life. They live as contemplatives with an active apostolate. The most important work they do is sustaining all of us in our pro-life ministries and supporting us by their prayer and words of encouragement. But they also provide direct services to women who either are suffering after an abortion or helping them in the journey to make the choice for life. In addition to their wonderful work here in Philadelphia that began just last year, the sisters are also working in New York, Connecticut, and Colorado. Our speaker, Sister Grace Dominic, is a native of Washington, D.C. She's a graduate of both the Catholic University and the Franciscan University at Steubenville. And prior to her entering the Sisters of Life in 2008, she worked for 5 years as a journalist. And while covering Pope John Paul II at World Youth Day in Toronto, she began to feel the Lord moving in her heart and calling her to religious life. Prior to her coming to Philadelphia, she served at the Visitation Mission in New York City and also as the Director of Vocations for the Sisters of Life, which, praise God, is a very busy job. Two things that she doesn't often share with many people are that her great love for mixed martial arts, I'm kidding, but a true story is that Sister very much wanted to be a rockette, and then she found out about the height limitations, and that prevented that dream from coming true. But God used that to open up another door, our Sister of Life, Sister Grace Dominic.
I don't know how to respond to that. But it is a great honor to be in your presence, you all who are heroic voices in building the culture of life. It's a great privilege. Thank you, Tom Stevens and the Pro-Life Union, for this very gracious invitation. I have a friend, a young friend named Grace. I met her when she was 4, and she's a little bit older than that now. She and her brother have a genetic syndrome, and it has caused many complications, and they've gone through a lot of surgeries, their young lives. And Grace and I, we hit it off because we have the same first name. And when she speaks to you, she wants your undivided attention, and she speaks with a very high voice like that. And one day we were talking after Mass, and I was with one of my sisters, and she's looking at Sister Jana, and she's looking at me, and she said, Sister Grace Dominic, do you love her? And I said, yeah, I love her so much. She's my little sister. I would do anything for her. But it was a fleeting moment of satisfaction. And the next moment she said, oh, do you love me? I said, yeah, I love you to the moon and back, kid. And there was still something unresolved in her heart. And the next moment she said, oh, well, who do you love more, her or me? And I was totally taken aback by this innocent question that betrayed the existential longing on her heart to be loved, to be chosen the most. And this is inscribed on all of our hearts, right? To be loved and to give love, to be gift for another. And that's the foundation of what we strive to do. And in addition, in our ministries, we hope to engender that love in another, to elicit a response of love in another person's heart. Last year, I guess it was a couple years ago now, I was at a funeral mass of a good friend of our founder, Cardinal O'Connor, and our community as well. I stood amid hundreds of NYPD officers and thousands of mourners and a lot of Sisters of Life who came to pray for and remember Lieutenant Stephen Mcdonald, who had been killed a couple years ago, but he was shot at 30 years before in the line of duty, and he was left paralyzed from the neck down. He went home to God almost 2 years ago, and amid tears, the gathering was both triumphant and glorious. There were bagpipers and drummers that lined Fifth Avenue. There were choppers that were flying in formation over the cathedral in New York City. Stephen was a hero. He was an icon, not just to the NYPD, but to everyone that he ever encountered. He allowed this tragedy to be the means of his own transformation, and that gave hope to countless souls. After being shot at 3 times point blank by a teenage bike thief in Central Park, he was left quadriplegic with his young wife, pregnant, by his side. He spent the next 18 months in the hospital, and on the day of his son's baptism, Stephen forgave his attacker in a public statement. Here was a man who could no longer touch his wife. He would never hold his child. He could only breathe with the support of a ventilator. He was completely vulnerable and dependent, but his love transcended the physical. St. John the Beloved says, "See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of God, and so we are." Stephen began to believe in the Father's love, and he came to know that his life was a gift. He began to receive everything as gift, and he spent the rest of his life speaking to thousands on the power of forgiveness, his faith in Christ Jesus, his love for the Blessed Mother. He became a witness to the beauty of life, of mercy, hope, courage, and heroic love in the midst of the cross, in the midst of suffering. So this evening I thought we'd talk about just 3 things: receiving everything the Father gives to us as gift, recognizing the summons and entrustment we've been given, and the invitation to respond, to embrace the cross and persevere no matter what the cost. So 3 things: gift, entrustment, invitation. John the Beloved says, God is love, and that's the essence of our Trinitarian God that you know so well. Everything else is an overflow of that original love, an intentional overflow. And we catch a glimpse of this love every day, this overflow every day, right? This beauty that surrounds us, the brilliant starlit sky, the sun, the moon, the ocean, every gentle breeze and ray that touches our face. The grandeur of the cosmos reveals to us the Father's love. It reveals to us that God is beautiful, and he spills out he's so beautiful, it spills out of him. And you ever ask yourself, why meteor showers? Why shooting stars? Why rainbows? Why the giraffe? Why the ladybug? Why does God create a cute bug? It is his beauty that spills out, right, for us to delight in as gift. And then the crown of creation. One of our convents is in the Bronx, and it's right next to a school, a grade school, and sometimes our sisters will be invited to go over and say hello to the kids. And one of my sisters was with a bunch of, usually it's at lunch and recess, it's our favorite. And one of our sisters was with a bunch of kindergartners, and this is the Bronx, you know, one little girl's looking at her habit, and finally she says, "What is on your head?" And sister says, "This is my veil." And she starts talking about weddings and brides and the mystical union. And the little kindergartner looks at her, confused. And sister says, "I wear a veil because I'm married to Jesus." And the kindergartner, with a wide eye, looks at her, throws her hands down on the table and says, "He chose you." Yeah, mystery to me too, kid. But isn't that the truth of each of us? He chose you. He chooses us, each of us, willed and loved into existence. A trace of the glory of God, as John Paul II says in the Gospel of Life, fashioned in creative genius and purpose, to share in his capacities, to create, to dream, to choose, to live in freedom with an intellect and a will capable of self-knowledge and self-possession. He chose you, an embodiment of the Father's thought. He chose you, an overspill of his beauty. He chose you as gift, to be given as gift. And we recognize this truth in the mystery of God entering into our human condition. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. God comes to us as a little baby so that we may know our worth. Fragile, utterly dependent. And as if that were not enough, Pope Benedict calls Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection love in its most radical form. And God is more. He loves us to the point of dwelling in us. What gift. And isn't this the love that we hold out to the world? His redeeming love that we so desperately want the world to know. Years before he founded our community, he was Archbishop Cardinal John O'Connor, but before that, he had a powerful experience while making a retreat in a monastery in Dachau, an old village outside of Munich. And while he was there, he was walking through, he went to the Nazi concentration camp. It was one of the first concentration camps, and he was walking through the barracks. And he put his hand in one of the brick ovens where the Nazis incinerated their victims. And he said that he had this mystical experience of sorts. He placed his hand in the crematoria, and he said that he could feel the intermingled ashes of Jew, Christian, clergy, layperson, woman, man, and child. And he cried out from the depths of his being, "Good God, how can human beings do this to human beings?" And at that moment, he made a promise to God that he would do anything he could to protect life, to speak out for the vulnerable, to pray for those most in need of our prayers. Cardinal O'Connor would later say that this experience changed his life forever. He would even go on to say that the people who died at Dachau shaped his adult life. And as you know so well, he became a prolific voice, always speaking for the great dignity of human life. But for Cardinal O'Connor, it wasn't just about abortion or euthanasia. It was what he called the contempt for human life. A contempt for life that doesn't seem perfect, convenient, or wanted. A contempt for life that is weak or helpless. And after years of prayer, he founded our community, the Sisters of Life, in 1991. We take a fourth vow to protect and enhance the sacredness of human life through missions fueled by prayer. He knew, he would say, that love is the only response to human life. And this is what transforms lives. This is what will bring about a cultural change, our love. Cardinal O'Connor would often refer to the scene of Moses with God in the burning bush, right? You remember it. Moses, take off your sandals, for where you stand is holy ground. This is the love and reverence he felt that should be the disposition before every human life. Starting with ourselves. The mission starts in our own hearts first. This is holy ground. Do we believe that when we look in the mirror? This is holy ground. It starts here first. And then with the person that we've been entrusted with, a classmate, a sibling, a professor, a coworker, our parents, a spouse, a child, our neighbor, those who we encounter throughout the day. This is holy ground. It's the starting point. And you and I, like Cardinal O'Connor, have received a summons. We've tasted and seen the consequences of the culture of death and its lies. You're here because you've been recruited by God, no matter how you got in that seat. God recruited you to speak and pray for the most vulnerable. God trusts you. He trusts that you are capable of embracing this mission, capable of responding to the gift of life with the gift of self, with the gift of your love, discovering and even being surprised by your own capacity to love, even when it feels like an uphill battle. He entrusts you to love. St. Thomas Aquinas says, the more we love God, the better our love is. We must be a people of deep prayer because this is God's work. Nourished by his word, frequenting the sacraments, even spending a few moments with him in silent prayer in our own hearts, to be transformed in his love, especially in the dark places of our hearts that we want to keep hidden from him. And as we do, we begin to see as he sees. We begin to live with what John Paul II in the Gospel of Life calls the contemplative outlook, to see the wonder of each human life, not to take possession of reality, but to receive it as gift, not to be discouraged by suffering or afraid of the cross, because the cross comes, and you know that so well. A few years ago, when I was serving in our visitation mission in New York, as Father mentioned, I was working with a young woman who was pregnant. She was 6 weeks pregnant, and she was scheduled to have an abortion. She was bitter and resentful with life, and we began an ongoing relationship, and every week she kept postponing the abortion. And we put her in touch with some really wonderful people, and eventually she began to experience God's love for her. And she was actually looking forward to this baby. And a couple months down the road, the doctors gave her an adverse prenatal diagnosis of Spina Bifida. And they told her that she needed to go through some more testings just to confirm the diagnosis. And they began to tell her about the hardships of Spina Bifida and that it wasn't too late to have an abortion. And they look at her and she says, "No more tests." And they said, "Well, what would you like to do?" And she said, "I'd like to be a good mom." And the doctor looked at her and said, "I don't think you understand." And this young woman looked at that doctor and she said, "No, I don't think you understand. If my baby has spina bifida, my baby has spina bifida." And she walked out. She had been so transformed in love that she began to recognize herself as love, and she began to recognize her own capacity to love. She saw the goodness of her daughter. She was able to see beyond a potential hardship or suffering. Love is not afraid of the cross. I told you about my little friend, Grace. Well, she had the opportunity of meeting Cardinal Dolan. And Grace, she's teeny tiny. And, well, Cardinal Dolan, he's not. And he scooped her up, and she pulled out his pectoral cross, so this big cross that bishops wear. And she had it in her hand, and she said, "May I kiss your cross? May I kiss your cross?" And he says, "Why, yes." He doesn't talk like that either. And she kisses his cross and puts it back in his pocket. And then she pulled out a little crucifix that she was wearing, a teeny tiny crucifix that she was wearing. And she held it up to the cardinal and she said, "Would you like to kiss my cross? Would you like to kiss my cross?" And he sure did. The culture makes it difficult to kiss the cross. When we kiss the cross that is entrusted to us, when we kiss each other's crosses, love is strengthened, and we're prepared for anything, because this love is stronger than death. Now, looking out at many of these young faces, I think of Sophie Scholl, a young college student in Germany in 1942, who along with her brother and friend began a resistance movement called the White Rose. And they began publishing leaflets by mass production, leaving them in lecture halls and the public square, mailing them out. They were calling for a restoration of democracy and justice. And the leaflets were distributed widely throughout central Germany, exposing the Nazis, the atrocities that they were committing, and committing their fellow Germans to passively resist the Nazis. And in February 1943, they were spotted distributing these leaflets. And a few days later, they were arrested, interrogated, and charged with treason in a puppet court. And just a few hours later, Sophie, her brother, and friend were beheaded. It was the execution for treason. And she was recorded in court saying, "Somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is also believed by many others. They just do not dare express themselves as we did. Somebody, after all, had to make a start." And I also look out at you and I see those who made that start in 1973, or well before that time. Thank you. We stand on your shoulders. Sophie and her comrades received a summons when they discovered the atrocities the Nazis were committing. They knew the terrifying consequences of their action, but they had to respond because love is not afraid of the cross. And we too are fighting a tyranny against life, tyranny against the contempt for human life. But our weapons are our prayer, it's our love, are the missions that the Lord has inspired through you to hold out a way of hope for those in need. An encounter with the world with a message that is clear and uncompromising. We must stand in solidarity. We need each other. Our missions complement one another. Towards the end of the Vietnam War, there were about 300 POWs that were sent to one location, and the men there decided that they would have a prayer service every Sunday at 12 o'clock. And there was a rule of silence there, and they began their prayer service, and they started singing Amazing Grace and God Bless America, and the prison guards come screaming in, and they arrest the top 7 guys, pull them out, beat them, and throw them into individual cells. The 8th man in command stands up. "Gentlemen, our prayer service has been interrupted. Let us begin again." Is right. They began singing. They began praying. Prison guards come back in. They are belligerent. "There is a rule of silence here." They drag the next 7 guys in command. They beat them in front of everyone and throw them into solitary confinement. The next man in command stands up. "Gentlemen, our prayer service has been interrupted. Let us begin again." Same thing happens. It happens until the prison guards arrest 49 men. They have no more cells. The prison guard comes in and starts yelling at the next man in command. "There is a rule of silence here. There is no God here," he says. POW looks at him and says, "You are going to have to kill every single one of us. We are not going to stop." We must keep going, no matter what the cost. The guards left them alone. And as we persevere, may our message be a message filled with God's love and tenderness, because we have been entrusted with souls that have been ravaged by the culture of death. We're literally picking up the broken pieces. Mercy. Mercy. We are called to be a people of mercy, to ask for God's mercy, and then to hold out that mercy for others. One of our beautiful missions that Father mentioned in New York is our Hope and Healing mission, where women come to us after an abortion experience looking for God's mercy and healing. And they come to us 5, 10, 20, 40, 50 years after an abortion experience looking for God's mercy. Recently, we had a woman who was 86 years old come to us. It was the first time she spoke to anyone about her abortion. It is never too late for God's mercy, even for those who perpetuate a culture of death, that they too may be transformed. When we hold out mercy, miracles happen. One of our good friends is a neonatologist in New York City, Dr. Elvira Parravicini. She is the founder of the world's first hospice for newborn babies. And she began working with a team of doctors, all specialists in high-risk pregnancies. And they would meet regularly to discuss cases. And without question or discussion, they would respond to each case by recommending abortion. Only Dr. Parravicini would advocate for the lives of the women and for the children. And one day she was presented with an extremely challenging case. It was a teenage couple, pregnant with conjoined twins. 2 little girls that were attached at the chest. They shared one heart. And everyone knew that it would be impossible to save them. But this young couple heroically chose life, and they were encouraged by Dr. Parravicini. And on the day of delivery, the operating room was filled with doctors, nurses, techs, interns, med students. And a lot of them were there because they were drawn by a curiosity to see this rare occurrence of birth. And many even scoffed and were horrified that these little girls were brought to full term. But when they were born, you could hear a pin drop. Little Keela and Kayla were born embracing each other, weighing in at 1.5 pounds each. The young father asked Dr. Parravicini if he could hold his little girls. And he held his barely breathing daughters, and he looked at them and he said, "Don't be afraid. Daddy is here." It was a strong, unwavering, confident love, unafraid of the cross. There wasn't a dry eye. After a few moments, Dr. Parravicini asked the young father if he would like her to baptize the little girls, and he said yes. She began to make the sign of the cross. "I baptize you, Keela, in the name of the Father and of the Son." And the young dad grabs her hand. "Stop! No, that one's Kayla." Was there suffering in that room? Yeah. Was there hope? Was there love, unafraid of the cross? Yeah. The power of God's beauty and love, born out of the cross, pierced the hearts of all those who were present. See what love the Father has given us. Just moments after Cardinal O'Connor was ordained bishop by Pope John Paul II in Rome at St. Peter's, he was still dripping with chrism oil and walking to his seat, and he sees Mother Teresa standing almost pressed against the wall in the sanctuary. And he had never met her before, so he starts walking to her, and he stands before her, towering before her tiny presence, and he put his hands in her hands. And she took his hands and looked at him and said, "Give God permission." That was all she said. That was all she needed to say. Give God permission. And those words were etched in Cardinal O'Connor's heart. He often echoed those words to the sisters. Give God permission. When we give God permission, when we believe his love for us, receive it as gift, when we allow him to take over our lives and our hearts and transform our hearts, he allows us to see as he sees, so that we too may respond to each moment, to each person that is entrusted to us with love, unafraid of the cross. It is a great privilege to stand in solidarity alongside you in this great city. Thank you for all you are. Thank you for your love, for your prayers, for your witness. Thank you for being faithful to the mission that God has entrusted to you. Your love matters. God bless you.